In this episode, you will hear how the king starts to move on Esther's behalf and what Esther is doing in the meanwhile. So stay tuned and you will hear more about this. Welcome to the Voicer podcast. Thank you for joining me to study the book of Esther in this Bible study that I have called From Hadassah to Esther, Becoming that Esther that this generation needs Christians to be. And we are right now in chapter 6, and today we'll be covering chapter 6 and 7 that have a lot of things happening, but they give a picture to us, something about the king and what he's about to do for Esther as she's doing her own thing. So, you can get the notes from this episode and from all the episodes from our website voicer.fi, so you can remind yourself what great things we have been talking about from the book of Esther. And you can go and listen to the previous episodes where we covered so many good points from the story of Esther, how we have ended up in this point in chapter 6 where the king starts to move on Esther's behalf. So this will be my favorite episode, as we are going to talk about what the king does and what Esther does and what happens. So, sometimes breakthroughs in our lives, as this chapter 6 talks about the breakthrough starting to happen in Esther's life. Sometimes these breakthroughs happen in a way we didn't expect them to happen. But the important thing is that the king must be involved in our lives and doing those breakthroughs as we are doing our thing, which is to focus on the king, focus on him. And we have chosen to walk the path of a transformed Christian, of an Esther, and we are in the plan of God. So let me just say something about this plan of God. You choose to be an Esther. You choose to separate yourself from the old, and the plan of God starts working in your life. And you don't have to figure out how it happens. You don't have to figure out what is the next step, what are you needing to do. You don't have to figure out everything, but you have to decide, who do you want to be. Do you want to be this Esther? And then the plan starts to move in your life like it started to move in Esther's life. And so in Psalms 32 and verse 8 says, and I have this verse on my refrigerator to remind me of the path of the righteous. It says, I will guide you along the best pathway for our life. I will advise you and watch over you. So, but you must be on this pathway. You have to choose to be an Esther, to be on this pathway that God can guide you in your life forward in the new creation life that He wants you to live. So in the previous episode, we talked about two very simple but and basic, very powerful things that you are supposed to do towards the King as you are approaching him and as you are waiting for the breakthrough. And those things are worship and giving. And in Esther chapter 5, let's just read this. In Esther chapter 5 and verse 6, there is the first banquet that Esther prepared for the king. And it says, and while they were drinking wine, the king said to Esther, now tell me what you really want. What is your request? I will give it to you, even if it's half of the kingdom. And so she was preparing a banquet for him. And what did Esther really want by having this breakthrough? She wanted to prevent shame, for shame to come to the Jews and destruction come to the Jews, but also prevent shame for the king to do a thing that was not wise. She had this first banquet, and she didn't ask immediately from the king what to save the Jews, but she asked him to come again, and Haman to come again. And sometimes when we are preparing God a banquet, we need to do that over and over again. It cannot be just one concert where you shout out Jesus is the king with all of your strength and okay, that's the banquet. But you might need to do a couple of banquets for the Lord with your worship and with your giving. That you have him on your mind constantly. And here is what Esther replied to the king. This is my request and deepest wish. If I had found favor with the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my request and do what I ask, please come with Haman tomorrow to the banquet. So she wanted to prepare another banquet, and she wanted to show more appreciation and love towards the king. So that's what Esther did. And really, she didn't have, although she wanted to save the Jews and she had this on her mind, she didn't have her own agenda, which means our own agendas when we come before Jesus are like, and it is obvious in chapter 7, verse 4, it says that. For my people and I have been sold to those who would kill and slaughter and annihilate us. If we had merely been sold as slaves, I could remain quiet, for that would be too trivial a matter to warrant disturbing the king, which means that basically slavery or them being exiled or them not being in Jerusalem or them not having the best places in houses in Susa was not the agenda of of Esther. That would have been the agenda of Hadassah, her own agendas. But Esther had a kingdom agenda, which was to prevent shame, which was to promote good things in the kingdom. It was a kingdom agenda. So she wasn't. She was looking for the best for the king and for the kingdom, and so that was the deepest wish of her heart, to have another banquet with the king, and in the end to prevent shame on the king's name and on the king. So we need to understand that one worship service is not enough. It's a good start. One offering is not enough, but it's a good start. But you need to prepare a banquet for the king. And so in chapter 6 and verse 1, it says how the breakthrough started to happen for Esther. That night the king had a trouble sleeping. So he ordered an attendant to bring the book of the history of his reign so it could be read to him. In those records he discovered an account of how Mordecai had exposed the plot of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the eunuchs who guarded the door of the king's private quarters. They had plotted to assassinate King Xerxes. What reward or recognition did we ever give Mordecai for this? The king asked. His attendants replied, nothing has been done for him. So, while Esther was busy preparing the banquet for the king started to move on on her and her family's behalf. As she was worshiping and giving and focusing to make the king feel welcome to her banquet, the king started to move on her behalf. He sees the dream and he starts to move. And so next it tells the story how Haman enters and thinks the king wants to honor him, but instead the king wanted to honor Mordecai, and it led to Haman being humiliated by promoting Mordecai and putting him on the king's horse and showing him off. So it says in verse 12 that afterwards Mordecai returned to the palace gate, but Haman hurried home dejected and completely humiliated. So the breakthrough in Esther's life started in a bit of a different way. When God started to move, he started honoring some good things in her life. And this is the situation where you must understand Esther didn't do much, but the king was moving, and the king started to go after Esther's enemies. So I just love this. I'm busy worshiping, honoring God, focusing on him, and he starts to move on my behalf. And the important thing here is that you prepare him a banquet, not just some random leftovers of your life, but a banquet that he feels he's the first one in your life. Okay, so now we are moving to chapter 7, and let's just say that in the end of chapter 6, Haman's wife already said that don't oppose Mordecai. You are going to fall before him if you are opposing him. So everybody knew that the fall of Haman had started here. But then we move to chapter 7, and the king really goes after Esther's enemies. So this is so hilarious, the whole situation where Haman wanted to honor himself by sitting on the king's horse, but Mordecai was honored. Haman had built a sharpened pole to kill Mordecai, but in the end, he was killed on that pole. So this is so hilarious how the king does everything and how God moves in our lives. Because the enemy wants to steal our talents, he wants to steal our life, and he wants to steal everything we are and destroy the plan of God in our lives. We must remember that he's always after the plan of God in our lives. And can he do this? Unfortunately, if we don't agree to be transformed into an Esther and keep on transforming, being that Esther, he can do that. But not if we choose to be an Esther. Then he cannot do that. He cannot destroy us because the king starts to move on Esther's behalf. Takes like God does for us, starts to move in our behalf and takes those talents, takes those things that the enemy tried to harm in our lives, and takes those things and starts turning them for his things around for his use. And this is the important thing. Why will God do this? Why did the king do this? He did it because you are an Esther. He did it because of Esther. He would not have done it because of Hadassah, but he did it for Esther. Hadassah might also have the benefits of something good happening in the court towards Jews, but for Esther, it was a personal thing from the king. The king did it for Esther, for his queen. So let's just let that sink in. If we are Esther, this is one of the greatest benefits in our life. God will do it for us because we are an Esther, because we have chosen to transform from Hadassah to Esther. He will do it for us. It will be a personal thing for between him and us. So in chapter 7, both Haman and king are in the banquet, and it says, after Esther said the verse we already read, that I'm pleading for my people, I'm pleading for our lives. And then in verse 5 it says, who would do such a thing? King Xerxes demanded. Who would be so presumptuous as to touch you? Because this seemed in the situation towards the king a personal attack. A personal attack, although Haman may not have planned it that way in the beginning. It was a personal thing for Haman, but in this situation it was a personal thing, and the king felt it as a personal thing towards him and to his rule, because he thought that Haman was trying to attack his queen. So this is how God sees your enemy, as he's attacking your life. It's a personal thing to him. If you're an Esther and the enemy is attacking you, he's attacking him. He's attacking God, and he's attacking a person who is preparing a banquet for the king, who is showing honor, whose family is showing honor to the king, and the enemy is attacking that kind of person. And it's like God saying to us, how are you so presumptuous that you are attacking my Esther, my Christian, my transformed person, my transformed child? And then the king really starts to move, and Haman is destroyed. Haman is impaled on a pole. Haman is taken care of. The king kills Haman. And before this, Haman should be afraid. Like he said, he was afraid. And before he was killed, the king exclaimed as he saw Haman trying to ask Esther for help. He said, "Will he even assault the queen right here in the palace before my very eyes?" So the king took this offense towards Esther as a personal thing. So now Haman has been destroyed. The danger from Esther's life, the source of the danger has been destroyed. But wait, the story isn't over yet. So sometimes we Christians think that, okay, my personal Haman is out of my back, so now I have the victory. But no, the story is not over yet. Uh, we are not supposed to stay there. We are not supposed to be satisfied just in this point, but we are supposed to go forward with the victory and show everybody the God who starts to move while you are preparing him a banquet with your life. To represent that king who moves when you and your family show honor to him, and just you your purpose on getting that breakthrough is to bring heaven on earth, is to show the king's character to everyone, is to show and represent that king and his kingdom, not you and your wisdom on how you handled the situation, but the king who is moving while you are preparing him a banquet. I love this. This is just wonderful for us to remind how the breakthroughs start happening in our lives, and what we are supposed to do after they really start happening and opening. We are supposed to get all the juice out of that breakthrough. We are supposed to get everything we can out of that breakthrough. We are supposed to tell everybody how this king moves in my life and how his character is who he says he is. So now we are just in this part in chapter 6 and 7 of Esther, where things really start to shift and evil is destroyed. And after this, we are supposed to know what happens after this in a Christian's life. And in the next episode, we are going to go there. What happens next? What we need to do next when the breakthrough starts to happen in our lives. But let's do a little recap of everything that we have been talking this far from the beginning. So how did we end up in this point? So you can see the pattern of a new creation life. How do you end up in the place of God starting to move in your life and something great starting to unfold in your life? So we can see from chapter 1 that we need to decide who we want to be. Do we want to be Vashti, the worldly Christian, Hadassah, the good Christian, or Esther, the royal Christian? And we need to separate ourselves from that old and go after what we want to be. And in the middle of that, we need to understand that we are adopted, childs of God, and understand that our good Father has a plan for our life that is greater than any plot that the enemy brings. Then in our walk as new creation beings, we need to understand that we are not to live in our comfort zone, but to step out and position ourselves for the victory. Position ourselves for the victory before it happens. And we do this by focusing on God, by our worship, and by our giving. Every kind of giving, not talking only about money, but every kind of giving your talents, your time, your family, everything to God. And this is how we prepare him a banquet in our lives. And this is how we will really start to see that while we are honoring God, while we are worshiping him, while we are preparing him a banquet in our lives, God, the King, starts to move on our behalf, and it will be a personal battle for him, on our behalf, to destroy darkness that is going after us. God goes after our enemies. So this is a wonderful picture for us. And as Esther was preparing a banquet for the king, God starts to move, and God moved for her because she had transformed into an Esther and was the representative of the kingdom, Esther. Thank you for joining me today in this Bible study, and I'm so excited for the next two episodes as we are going to move forward to the results of having this breakthrough with the king. So, come again next week, and you will hear more about this victory and what you're supposed to do when your Haman has been destroyed. And you can go to voicer.fi, to our webpage, to get the notes from this episode and from all the episodes. And subscribe to this podcast so you know when the next episode comes out. Also, you can take advantage of my new book, Clash of Book and Blade, and read the fantasy story that talks about the battle for the honor of God and goes into the supernatural realm, what's happening there, and why we are created. And this book is coming out in Finnish too soon, next week. And it's called Aikakirja ja pimeyden hyökkäys. So soon my Finnish listeners can get it from Amazon as a Finnish version too. So I'm excited about this. Join me again next time in this Bible study from Hadassah to Esther as we are learning how to become those Esthers for this generation and really going into what the overwhelming victory for us is that God has prepared for us.